Hey guys, welcome back. This is going to be our week 4 discussion on California, another Leaving Los Angeles, the Ruins of Los Angeles novel with our two brave travelers heading into the wilderness to find their home. Finding Cal and Frida's adventure into the land and then the community and their backstories, I think is an important break from the kind of misery and awfulness and darkness of gold-famed citrus. But I think California, too, is also a pretty dark story. It has a lot of similar tropes, and it echoes a lot of the same themes as had Clade and gold-famed citrus. And I think that's not only true of Cli-Fi, but also true of these kind of postmodern utopia versus dystopian kind of stories. I really think California does a nice job of actually exploring 3 kinds of utopias, or we can actually ask questions of, are these 3 versions of utopias? And what I mean is, of course, the land, Micah's community as Cal and Frida first find it. And we get the backstory of what the land was. They were starving, they were a group of people that didn't have access to a lot of reliable food sources or medicines. They were harassed and assaulted by these pirates until Micah and his band of renegades, stepped in and seemed to take charge. Of course, that falls apart later. The backstory comes out for Cal and Frida. But until then, it seems like this community is very stable. This is actually a pretty manageable and tenable kind of utopian society. Then there's also the community, or the utopian community of the background of Planck, this perfect educational institution, the last remaining institution of higher education, right? We get the brief anecdotes about this place was for men only, and it was meant to instill not just a understanding of philosophy and economics and critical thought, but also of farming, of skills that could be taken out into the world and actually make the world a better place, which is kind of traditional. I mean, really traditional if you think about some of the really earliest kinds of higher education or actual schools, as we think of, like, old schools like Harvard and things like that, way back. Their design was not just as a place for the wealthy to send their children to become educated in philosophy and economics, but also to become better members of society, to lead those societies forward. We, of course, then figure out, though, that this utopian vision of education, where these young men go and, gain all this optimistic hope for the future that's crumbling around them, is actually a breeding ground for fundamentalism and a breeding ground for recruitment into these kind of pseudo-terroristic groups, which seems pretty fitting, actually. You get a bunch of young men that are kind of egging each other on, and you exploit that, and you get, potential suicide bombers, or you get potential radicals. And I'm not saying, of course, that that's what schools are, but I think that's the knee-jerk and certainly trope-filled ideal behind what these clusters of certain kinds of groups can turn into. And the last utopian vision that we see at the end of the novel is the community. In this case, it's called the Pines, right? Where Cal and Frida are kind of shuffled off to, which is hard to tell as if they are escaping the land with their lives at the end, or if they are trapped in yet another kind of cloistered community. The Pines, as we see it, is a very highly structured, highly regimented, highly controlled environment where any deviance of any kind results in your expulsion. You're being thrown out of this walled city into the wild to be surely, eaten alive by deer or something. I don't know. But we get the backstory of one of Cal and Frida's neighbor's sons addicted to this drug that seems to be flooding into this place from unknown agents. And it's not that he's a dangerous person. It's that because he is using drugs, that is outside of the norms. It is a taboo of such weight that he must be expelled to keep this community pure. And almost that is kind of like the land. The land, even though it is in the wilderness, it is clustered and is made safe by all these forms, these spikes that are handmade, that becomes a maze-like structure around this city, around the land as a community. which keeps people in as much as it keeps people out. And so the utopian version of the land and the pines really does become kind of a dystopian version of a place people can't escape. Once they're in, they are held in by these rigid codes. They are held fast by these expectations. And the threat of expulsion, the threat of death, the threat of being thrown to the pirates, to the dangers of the world outside of these walls or outside of these forms, is such a compelling kind of fear that it forces compliance. And that is no longer utopian. That is, in fact, now dystopian. So even though it's not the dune sea swallowing whole cities, it's not floods taking over all of London like we saw in our previous novels, these kinds of utopian visions quickly become dystopian by their very nature. There is nothing perfect and nothing even ultimately redeeming about these societies other than safety through force, safety through fear, safety through conformity. And I think even the plank is a sense of safety through conformity. We get these images of all these young men doing this weird knocking sign when they're talking. You know, it's very much a kind of a tongue-in-cheek view of maybe the Occupy Wall Street, or the 99% kind of protest movements of a decade ago. And yet those were such a strong social moment that the imagery of that, I think, can carry forward. And it's that idealism that is being used as a perversion, or is perverted into these kinds of maniacal leaders or maniacal forces controlling those who are just looking to live, just looking to survive, just looking to get back to that sense of a nuclear family, right? Cal and Frida, the idea of a pregnancy fills them with fear and terror, and yet biology takes over. The idea of having a child, of bringing a child into this world, of potentially having a child be a leading force to make the world better, is so strong that they are willing to risk everything. They are willing to give up many things to follow this path of potential parenthood, a potential bringing a child into this, to give up themselves. By the end of the book, we see that Cal and Frida have, whether we believe it or not, have grown into these new identities as the birth of their child looms. Cal has taken this role on of becoming his kind of a corporate yes man in this area of the Pines, and he seems to have gone full force into it. Frida is now picturing herself as a, almost Betty Crocker, 1950s, stay-at-home suburban housewife, right? Which, even earlier in the novel, she complains about how the end of the world seems to mean that all the progress women had made, right, in terms of social equality, in terms of being seen as not the weaker sex or gender, seems to have gone out the window because it's all about upper body strength. Well, here it's all about conformity. And I think these are very important aspects that you, as readers, are probably noticing and worth talking about. Certainly, thinking about Frederick Jameson, that article we read a couple weeks back now, Utopia's Method, really should come into play here. The idea that this novel has that postmodern ambivalence toward utopian that distinctly forecloses the possibility of progress or of real solutions. The solutions here of these communities is to be walled off, is to be cloistered. When you read about these characters, what color are they? How old are they? There are no gay people. There are no black people. There are people mostly that are small communities, small homogenous communities. That is not necessarily utopian. That's actually reactionary, right? That is much more dystopian. And I think that is something that's worth talking about, worth focusing on. California is a novel, certainly not as dark as Goldflame Citrus, but man, is it a fun read. And I think you probably noticed by the end of it, very much opens the door for a sequel. I hope there's one on the way. Looking forward to our conversation this week. Good luck with your draft presentations of your projects. Very much looking forward to that. I'll have another video about how to get those things posted and what to be looking for momentarily. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to a conversation this week.